Allison Reed chose the pale blue dress carefully. 2 years since the accident that left her paralyzed from the waist down, and this was her first date. She had practiced the smile, rehearsed potential conversation topics, but a persistent voice in her head kept asking whether she was making a mistake. The mirror that morning had shown a woman almost like the one from before. Styled hair, carefully applied makeup, a dress that complemented her eyes. Almost the same, except for the wheelchair that now defined how the world saw her. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and freshly ground coffee. Autumn sunlight streamed through large windows, casting golden patches across polished wood floors. Allison had arrived 20 minutes early to secure the corner table by the window. The space offered enough room to maneuver without bumping into other chairs, a calculation that had become second nature. She positioned herself facing the door, not wanting to miss his arrival, then busied herself adjusting the table setting, moving the salt shaker a fraction to the left, then back again. Her phone buzzed. A message from him. Just parked. Be there in a minute. Allison's stomach tightened as she slipped the phone back into her purse. She had been honest about everything in their online conversations. Her interests, her job teaching virtual fitness clients, her sense of humor. Everything except the wheelchair. It wasn't dishonesty, she told herself, just strategy. Let him see me as a person first, then the chair. The bell above the door chimed. He walked in looking exactly like his photos. Tall, clean-cut, wearing a gray cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her monthly physical therapy bills. His eyes scanned the cafe, found her by the window. Allison raised her hand in a small wave, summoned her most confident smile. He started walking toward her table, recognition in his expression. Then his gaze dropped to the wheelchair, to the wheels, to the footrests where her legs rested. Unmoving, his expression shifted. Not disgust exactly, more like disappointment, as if he'd ordered something online and received the wrong item. You didn't mention this in your profile. His voice carried across the quiet cafe. Allison felt her smile freeze. I wanted to tell you in person. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. He looked around, suddenly aware that people were watching. A couple at the next table had stopped talking. The barista glanced over from behind the counter. Look, I'm sure you're nice, but I don't do charity cases. This isn't what I signed up for. The words hit like a physical blow. Allison's hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for coffee. He was already backing away. I don't think this is going to work. Good luck with everything. He turned and walked out. The bell chimed again as the door closed behind him. The cafe fell silent. Allison could feel every eye on her. The couple at the next table looked away quickly. The barista busied herself with wiping down the espresso machine. Allison stared at the empty chair across from her. She'd pulled it aside earlier to make room for her wheelchair. Such a small, practical gesture that now felt humiliating. She'd made space for him, and he'd walked away. Her throat tightened. She would not cry, not here, not in front of all these strangers. She reached for her coffee cup, grateful to have something to hold, something to do with her hands. Daddy, why is that lady sad? The voice was small and clear, a child's voice, unfiltered by adult politeness. Allison looked up. A little girl stood a few feet away, maybe 6 years old, with dark curls and enormous brown eyes. She wore a yellow dress with daisies on it and held a stuffed elephant under one arm. Behind her stood a man in his mid-30s. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that somehow didn't look pretentious. His silver gray tie loosened slightly at the collar. His expression registered surprise, then understanding as his eyes moved from Allison to the empty chair and back again. Rosie, we shouldn't interrupt people. The gentle reprimand carried no real force. The little girl was already moving closer to Allison's table. Are you sad because that man left? I saw him leave. That wasn't very nice. Allison managed a weak smile. I'm okay, sweetie. The little girl tilted her head, studying Allison with the brutal honesty of children. You don't look okay. You look like you're going to cry, but you're trying not to. My name is Sophie. This is Mr. Trunks. She held up the stuffed elephant. He makes me feel better when I'm sad. The man stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on his daughter's shoulder. I apologize for the interruption. She hasn't quite mastered the concept of personal boundaries. It's fine, Allison said, though her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. Sophie looked up at her father. Can we help her? You always say we should help people who are sad. The man met Allison's eyes. There was something in his gaze, not pity exactly, but recognition, like he understood something about what she was feeling. Would you mind if we joined you? Only if you want company. We can absolutely leave you alone if you'd prefer. Allison should have said no, should have politely declined and wheeled herself out of this cafe and this entire mortifying situation. But something about the way he asked, like her answer actually mattered, like she had agency in this moment, made her nod. Sure, why not? The man pulled out the chair across from her, the one she'd moved aside for someone who never intended to stay. He helped Sophie into the seat beside him. The little girl immediately placed her stuffed elephant on the table facing Allison, as if the toy needed to be part of the conversation. I'm David Harrison. This is Sophie, Allison Reed. She extended her hand. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his palm warm against hers. Sophie leaned forward. I like your dress. It's the color of the sky. Allison looked down at the pale blue fabric. Thank you. I like your dress too. Mine has flowers. See? Sophie pointed at the daisies embroidered on her yellow dress. Daddy says flowers make everything better. But I don't think that's always true. Like when I'm really sad, flowers don't help. Mr. Trunks helps. She held up the elephant again. Do you have a stuffed animal? David smiled apologetically. Sophie has strong opinions about emotional support animals. For the first time since her date had walked out, Allison felt something other than humiliation. A small crack in the armor of her embarrassment, just enough to let in a breath of air. I don't have a stuffed animal, she told Sophie, but I think you might be right about flowers. Sophie nodded solemnly, satisfied to have her worldview confirmed. David caught Allison's eye, and there was something in his expression, warm and genuine, that made her think maybe this disaster of a day might not end in complete catastrophe after all. The barista approached their table with a smile that held no trace of the earlier pity. Can I get you anything else? David ordered hot chocolate for Sophie and another coffee for Allison, waving away her protests about paying. So, David said after the barista left, do you want to talk about what happened, or would you prefer we pretend we're just three people who randomly decided to share a table? Allison appreciated that he'd asked. Most people either pushed too hard or tiptoed around everything like she might shatter at any moment. The second option sounds good. Sophie had pulled out a small notepad and crayons from her backpack and was already drawing, humming softly to herself. Daddy works a lot. Like, a lot. Sometimes I forget what he looks like. Sophie didn't look up from her drawing as she spoke. David laughed. That's a slight exaggeration. Is not. You work more than Tommy's dad, and he's a doctor who saves people's lives. What do you do that's more important than saving lives? Sophie looked genuinely curious. I run a technology company, David explained to Allison. Harrison Technologies. We develop adaptive software systems. Not exactly life-saving work. The name registered with Allison. Harrison Technologies was frequently in the business section of the newspaper, one of the fastest-growing firms in the Pacific Northwest. David Harrison wasn't just some businessman. He was a serious player in the tech industry. Nothing in his demeanor suggested the kind of ego she might expect from someone in his position. What about you? David asked. What do you do? The question landed heavier than he probably intended. What did she do? She used to be a gymnast, used to coach kids on weekends, used to have a life that made sense. Now she did physical therapy 3 times a week and tried to figure out what came next. I'm between things right now, Allison said carefully. Figuring out the next chapter. Sophie perked up. Like a book? I love books. Daddy reads me stories every night. Well, almost every night. Sometimes he falls asleep first because he's old. I'm 37, David said dryly, practically ancient. You have gray hair. Sophie pointed to his temples where strands of silver threaded through dark brown. 2 gray hairs. You've counted them multiple times. Allison smiled despite herself. The dynamic between them was pulling her out of the dark space she'd been sinking into. She took a sip of her fresh coffee and realized the barista had made it exactly the way she liked it. A touch of cinnamon, no sugar, even though she hadn't specified. Sometimes small kindnesses arrived unexpectedly. David's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it and frowned slightly. Work? Allison asked. Always. He silenced it without reading the full message. One of my projects is hitting some roadblocks, the Liberty Center. It's a rehabilitation facility we're building on the east side. There's apparently a crisis with the funding allocation. A funding emergency, Sophie said solemnly. Very serious. Extremely serious, David agreed with equal gravity. He looked at Allison. It's actually a comprehensive rehabilitation center. We've been working on it for 2 years. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, the whole range of services. Something clicked in Allison's memory. In Portland, the new Liberty Center? David's eyebrows rose slightly. You know it? I did my rehab at the old Cascade location downtown. Allison felt something shift in her chest. They helped me a lot. I heard they were merging with a new facility, but I didn't realize it was already happening. We break ground in 3 weeks, David said. The goal is to make it more accessible, more comprehensive, better equipment, more staff, sliding scale fees so cost isn't a barrier. He didn't say it like he was bragging, just stating facts, but there was something in his voice when he talked about the center, a kind of conviction that surprised her. Why rehabilitation, she asked. David was quiet for a moment. Sophie had moved on to a new drawing, humming softly to herself. My wife, he said finally. Sophie's mother, Catherine. She had MS, multiple sclerosis. The Cascade Center downtown was where she went for treatment, where she learned to manage the symptoms as they progressed. The past tense hung in the air. Allison didn't ask. She didn't need to. She passed away 2 years ago, David added quietly. Since then, I've been trying to figure out how to make something good come from something so hard. The center expansion felt like a way to do that. Sophie looked up from her drawing. Mommy would like the new building. It has big windows and a garden. She would love it, David agreed, his voice soft. Allison felt her defenses lowering against her will. She'd assumed he was here out of pity, that he'd seen her humiliation and decided to swoop in like some kind of savior. But maybe it was more complicated than that. Maybe he understood something about loss and rebuilding that most people didn't. I'm sorry, Allison said. About your wife. David nodded his thanks. Then Sophie pushed her napkin across the table. I drew you a picture. It's you in your chair, but you have wings because chairs can fly if you want them to. Allison looked at the crayon drawing, a stick figure in a wheelchair with enormous purple wings sprouting from its back. Something in her throat tightened. It's beautiful, she said, and meant it. David checked his watch reluctantly. We should probably get going. Sophie has piano lessons at 4. He hesitated, then pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. This is my personal number. If you ever want to talk, or if you're interested in seeing the Liberty Center plans, we're actually looking for consultants with first-hand experience of rehabilitation services. Paid positions, to be clear. Allison took the card, oddly touched by his careful clarification that this wasn't charity. Thank you. Sophie slid out of her chair and came around to Allison's side of the table. Goodbye, Miss Allison. I hope you're not sad anymore. The little girl wrapped her arms around Allison in a quick hug before David could stop her. They left, Sophie chattering about her piano lesson as they walked to the door. David glanced back once, raised his hand in a small wave. Then they were gone, and Allison was alone again. But somehow the quiet of the cafe no longer felt like a spotlight on her humiliation. She tucked David's card into her purse and wheeled herself out, nodding goodbye to the barista. The autumn air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. For the first time that day, she took a deep breath and felt like there might be possibilities ahead that she hadn't considered. Allison's apartment was on the ground floor of a converted Victorian house. The landlord had installed ramps and widened doorways after the accident, making it one of the few affordable places she could navigate without constant frustration. Still, daily life presented a steady stream of small challenges. The kitchen cabinets were too high for comfortable access. The bathroom was cramped, making transfers from chair to shower a careful choreography. She'd adapted, found workarounds, but some days the effort required for simple tasks felt overwhelming. She hung the blue dress in her closet, wondering if she would ever wear it again, or if it would become a symbol of this day's humiliation. She changed into leggings and a loose sweater, then wheeled into her small kitchen. The refrigerator held leftovers and a half-empty bottle of wine. She poured herself a glass, then rolled out onto the small patio that had been the apartment's main selling point. The evening air carried a hint of wood smoke. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor was grilling dinner. Allison pulled out the business card David had given her. Harrison Technologies was embossed in silver on heavy cardstock. On the back, his handwritten cell number and a simple note. No pressure, David. She traced the letters with her fingertip. The gesture felt genuine, but experience had taught her to be cautious. People often approached her with what seemed like kindness, only to reveal an underlying desire to feel good about themselves for helping the poor woman in the wheelchair. Her phone chimed with a reminder. She had a virtual fitness class to teach in 15 minutes. Since the accident, she'd managed to rebuild a small client base, mostly older adults working on mobility issues and people recovering from injuries. The pay barely covered her bills, but it gave her purpose and structure. She wheeled inside to set up her laptop in the cleared space of her living room, positioning the camera to hide the more cluttered areas of her apartment. For the next hour, she led 3 clients through a series of adapted movement exercises, demonstrating with her upper body while giving verbal cues for the full body versions. When I was competing, we used these movements to build core stability. Now focus on engaging your abdominal muscles as you extend your leg. Good, Margaret, that's exactly right. The familiar rhythm of instruction centered her, temporarily pushing aside thoughts of the cafe incident and the intriguing father-daughter duo who had rescued her from complete humiliation. After the class, she checked her emails. The physical therapy center where she occasionally assisted was cutting back hours due to funding issues. We regret to inform you that we can only offer 10 hours per week for the foreseeable future. Another financial setback, another adjustment to her carefully balanced budget. The familiar anxiety tightened around her chest. Her savings were dwindling and medical expenses continued regardless of her income fluctuations. Allison's gaze fell on David's business card again. The Liberty Center consultant position might offer more stable income. But was it wise to mix professional opportunity with whatever complicated emotions had been stirred up by today's encounter? She set the card aside, reluctant to make a decision while still processing the day's events. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Hope we didn't intrude too much on your day. Sophie insisted I let you know she's named her newest stuffed animal Allison. David Harrison. A smile tugged at her lips despite her reservations. She typed several responses, deleted them all, then finally settled on, "You didn't intrude. You salvaged what could have been a truly terrible day. Please tell Sophie I'm honored to join the stuffed animal family." She sent the message before she could overthink it, then wheeled herself to the bathroom to get ready for bed. The evening routine was methodical, transferring to the specially designed shower chair, washing her hair, drying off, managing hygiene needs that had become more complicated since losing function in her lower body. Simple tasks that now required planning and energy. By the time she transferred into bed, exhaustion weighed on her limbs. As she drifted towards sleep, Sophie's crayon drawing of the winged wheelchair floated through her mind. Such a simple, impossible thing, a chair that could fly. Yet the image lingered, carrying with it a strange, unexpected sense of possibility. The next morning brought a stack of medical bills in the mail and an email from her landlord about a rent increase. Allison spread the bills across her kitchen table, calculator in hand, working out which payments could be delayed and which were urgent. The precarious financial balancing act had become a monthly ritual since the accident. Her insurance covered the basics of her medical care, but deductibles, specialized equipment, and the income loss during her long recovery had created a hole she was still trying to climb out of. Her phone chimed with another text from David. "Good morning. Hope this isn't too forward, but we're doing a walkthrough of the Liberty Center construction site today. Sophie has a school holiday and is coming along. She specifically requested your presence. No pressure, but if you're free around 11, we'd love to show you around. Might give you a better sense of the consultant role I mentioned." Allison hesitated. The practical part of her recognized a potential job opportunity she couldn't afford to dismiss. The more cautious part remembered all the well-meaning people who had drifted away when they realized her condition wasn't temporary, that she wasn't going to provide them with an inspiring recovery narrative. Very few stuck around for the long, unglamorous reality of life with a spinal cord injury. Her schedule was open. The physical therapy center had cut her Wednesday hours. She texted back, "I can be there at 11. What's the address?" The Liberty Center was rising on what had once been an abandoned warehouse district at the edge of downtown Portland. Construction equipment dominated the site, but the building's framework was already substantial. A sprawling complex of interconnected structures with large windows that would eventually flood the spaces with natural light. David waited at the temporary entrance, Sophie beside him in a pink puffer jacket and rainbow boots, bouncing on her toes with barely contained energy. "Allison!" Sophie spotted her first, waving enthusiastically as Allison navigated her wheelchair along the temporary ramp that had been installed at the entrance. She had dressed practically for the construction site in jeans and a warm sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. David's expression warmed as she approached. "We're glad you could make it. The site architect is going to walk us through, but he's running a few minutes late. Traffic." Sophie darted forward. "Do you want to see my drawings of the garden? I helped design it." David laughed. Sophie has appointed herself assistant landscape architect. The actual professionals have been very patient with her input. Sophie pulled a folded paper from her pocket, smoothing it out to show Allison. "Here's where the flowers go, and here's a special path for wheelchairs, and this is a fountain where you can put your hands in the water." Allison studied the child's drawing with genuine interest. The garden design showed remarkable awareness of accessibility needs, with wide paths and raised beds that could be reached from a seated position. "Did you think of all this yourself?" Sophie shook her head. "Ms. Elena helped. She's the real architect. She showed me pictures of gardens for people in wheelchairs and people who can't see. Daddy says it's important that everyone can use the garden." David watched their interaction with a thoughtful expression. Sophie has strong opinions about inclusive design. She got very upset about a playground we visited last summer that her friend Zach couldn't use because of his wheelchair. She wrote a letter to the mayor. "The mayor actually wrote back," Sophie added proudly. "He said they're going to fix it next year." A man in a hard hat approached, extending his hand to Allison. "Elena couldn't make it. Family emergency. I'm Carlos Reyes, project manager. David asked me to show you around instead. I understand you're consulting on accessibility features?" Allison glanced at David, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, something like that," she said, deciding to play along until she better understood what he had in mind. Carlos led them through the construction site, pointing out features designed specifically with accessibility in mind. Extra wide hallways to allow wheelchairs to pass each other comfortably. Adjustable height counters in the therapy rooms. A hydrotherapy pool with multiple entry options, including a gentle ramp and a mechanical lift. Every doorway was threshold-free. Every bathroom spacious enough for a wheelchair to turn completely around. Allison found herself asking increasingly detailed questions. What about the flooring material? Some surfaces are difficult to navigate in a manual chair. Have you considered incorporating charging stations for power wheelchairs at regular intervals? The emergency evacuation plan should include multiple accessible exit routes. Carlos took notes, looking impressed. "These are excellent points. We've addressed some of them, but others." He glanced at David. "We should definitely incorporate these suggestions." They reached what would eventually be the main therapy gym, a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the area that would become Sophie's garden. Equipment would be delivered in the final phase of construction, but Allison could already envision how the space would function. She pointed out potential traffic flow issues and suggested adjustments to the planned equipment layout. "When I was doing my rehabilitation, the parallel bars were positioned in a way that made everyone feel on display. Privacy matters, even in a common therapy space." David had been quietly observing her interactions with Carlos, occasionally adding context about funding allocations or timeline constraints, but mostly letting her take the lead. Now he stepped forward. "What do you think so far?" Allison turned her wheelchair in a slow circle, taking in the potential of the unfinished space. "It's impressive. You've clearly thought about accessibility from the beginning, not as an afterthought. That's rare. Most buildings are adapted for accessibility after the fact, if at all," Allison continued. "It changes the entire experience when a space is designed with diversity of abilities in mind from the ground up. People can tell the difference between genuine inclusion and grudging accommodation." David's expression was thoughtful. "That's exactly what we're aiming for. Catherine used to say that the worst part of her condition wasn't the physical limitations. It was being made to feel like an inconvenience in spaces that weren't designed for her. Sophie had wandered to the windows, pressing her face against the glass to look out at the garden site below. Carlos excused himself to take a phone call, leaving Allison and David alone in the echoing space. "So," David said, his hands in his pockets, "this consultant role, I'm serious about it. We have funding for the patient advocate position, someone to review all our plans and protocols from the perspective of the people who will actually use this facility. It would be part-time initially, but with potential to grow as we get closer to opening." Allison studied his expression, looking for signs of pity or charity. She found none. "Why me? We only met yesterday." David considered her question. "Honestly? Because in the 15 minutes you spent with Carlos, you identified issues our paid consultants missed in months of meetings. And because you have the rare combination of personal experience and professional background in physical training. Sophie had told me you used to coach gymnastics." Allison raised an eyebrow. "Sophie told you that? I don't remember mentioning it." David had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I might have looked you up after we met. Professional curiosity, you were quite accomplished. Regional competitions, coaching certification. I'd think those skills would be valuable in a rehabilitation context." The idea that he had researched her should have felt invasive, but somehow it didn't. Perhaps because he had focused on her accomplishments rather than her injury. Before Allison could respond, David's phone rang. He checked the screen and grimaced. "I need to take this. Excuse me for a moment." He stepped away, his voice dropping as he answered. Carlos returned simultaneously, leading Sophie by the hand. "She found me in the garden area trying to plant paper flowers in the dirt." Sophie grinned, unrepentant. "I was showing the construction workers where the daisies should go." Carlos handed Sophie back to Allison with an amused smile. "Your turn to wrangle the junior landscape architect. I need to check on the electrical team." Suddenly responsible for a 6-year-old, Allison felt a flicker of panic. She hadn't spent much time with children since the accident. Before, as a gymnastics coach, she'd been physically capable, able to spot tumbling runs and demonstrate techniques. Now she wondered what she could offer. Sophie solved the dilemma by climbing onto a stack of plywood sheets beside Allison's wheelchair, bringing them to eye level. "Can I ask you a question? It's kind of personal." Allison braced herself for an uncomfortable inquiry about her wheelchair. Children were often curious about her disability, their questions direct and sometimes painfully honest. "Of course," she said, "ask me anything. Do you know how to draw an elephant that doesn't look like a potato? Because mine always look like potatoes with noses." Surprised by the mundane nature of the question, Allison laughed. "I'm not a great artist, but I can try to help. The basics of any animal drawing are shapes. For an elephant, you start with an oval for the body, not a circle." Sophie pulled a small notepad and pencil from her jacket pocket, her expression intent as Allison guided her through a simple elephant drawing. They were so absorbed in the impromptu art lesson that neither noticed David's return until his shadow fell across the notepad. "That's quite an improvement over your usual potato elephant, Soph. Everything okay?" Sophie held up her drawing proudly. "Miss Allison taught me about shapes. She says that's the secret to drawing anything. Start with the basic shapes and then add details. It's kind of like math, but more fun." David's expression was warm as he looked from his daughter to Allison. "Thank you for entertaining her. I hope she wasn't too demanding." Allison shook her head. "We had fun. I used to teach basic drawing techniques to my gymnastics students. Visualization helps with complex movements." She hadn't thought about those teaching moments in years, how naturally the guidance had flowed from her. The memory brought a bittersweet pang. David checked his watch. "I hate to cut this short, but I have a board meeting at 2 that I can't miss." Allison nodded, suddenly aware that she'd spent nearly 2 hours at the construction site. "Carlos has my contact information if you have any more questions about the accessibility features. I'm happy to provide additional input." David hesitated, then pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This contains the formal consultant offer, compensation details, expected hours, project scope. Take your time reviewing it. No pressure to accept." Allison took the envelope, surprised by the professionalism of the gesture. This was clearly not an impulsive offer born of pity. He had given this genuine thought. I'll review it and let you know my decision. Sophie tugged at David's sleeve. Can Miss Allison help me with my art project for school? It's due Friday and I'm supposed to draw a self-portrait, but people are hard. Daddy can't draw people at all. They look like robots. David looked chagrined. My artistic talents are limited to flowcharts and spreadsheets, I'm afraid. He glanced at Allison. Any chance you'd be willing to give Sophie another art lesson? I can pay you for your time, of course. There was no presumption in his tone, just a parent seeking help with a specific need. Allison found herself nodding. I could do Thursday after school if that works. Sophie clapped her hands in delight. Yes, Thursday! You can come to our house and see my room and meet my other stuffed animals. David smiled apologetically. She's been lobbying for visitors. It's been just the two of us for so long. The novelty of a guest is exciting. But really, only if you're comfortable with that. We could meet at a coffee shop instead. Your house is fine, Allison said, surprised to realize she meant it. Just text me the address and time. The three of them made their way out of the construction site, David helping navigate a section where the temporary ramp was steeper than ideal. Allison found herself making mental notes for future accessibility improvements, another indication that she was already taking the consultant role seriously, whether she had formally accepted it or not. At the parking lot, Sophie hugged Allison goodbye while David loaded her backpack into their car. A practical SUV, rather than the flashy sports car Allison might have expected from a successful tech CEO. See you Thursday. Don't forget to practice your elephants, Sophie called as she climbed into the back seat. Allison waved, then wheeled toward her own adapted sedan, equipped with hand controls that allowed her to drive independently. As she drove home, Allison's thoughts circled around the unexpected developments of the past 24 hours. From the humiliation of the cafe to a potential job offer and an art lesson appointment with an enthusiastic 6-year-old, none of it had been in her plans. The consultant position offered financial stability she desperately needed, but it also meant regular interaction with David Harrison, a man whose kindness might be genuine or might be another form of the pity she had come to recognize and resent. At home, Allison opened the envelope and studied the consultant offer. The compensation was generous, significantly more than her combined income from the virtual fitness classes and reduced physical therapy assistant hours. The responsibilities aligned well with her experience and perspective. It was, objectively, an excellent opportunity. So why was she hesitating? She wheeled out to her small patio with a cup of tea, watching the late afternoon sunlight filtering through the maple tree in the communal garden. The simple truth was that she had withdrawn from meaningful connections after the accident. Easier to manage expectations when you kept people at a distance. Safer to decline invitations than to navigate the often inaccessible world and the awkwardness that came with it. The consultant position and, by extension, the connection with David and Sophie represented a step back toward engagement with a world that had often felt indifferent to her needs. Her phone chimed with a text from David. No pressure on the consulting offer, but I realized I forgot to mention that we have a staff meeting tomorrow at 11 if you're interested in sitting in. Might give you a better sense of the project before you decide. Let me know if you'd like to attend. Allison sipped her tea, considering. The practical benefits were clear, the emotional risks less so. After several minutes of deliberation, she texted back, I'll be there. Then before she could second-guess herself, she added, and I'm looking forward to Sophie's art lesson on Thursday. That night, she dreamed of the unfinished rehabilitation center. But in the dream, the spaces were complete, filled with light and movement, people navigating the halls in wheelchairs and with walkers, the garden in full bloom outside. In the dream, she moved through the space with confidence, belonging there in a way she rarely felt in the waking world. She woke with the lingering impression that something important was taking shape, though whether it was the Liberty Center or something more personal remained unclear. The next morning, Allison dressed with particular care for the staff meeting, professional but not formal, a gray blazer over a simple blouse, hair pulled back neatly. The Harrison Technologies headquarters occupied the top floors of a downtown office building. The lobby directory listed Liberty Center Foundation on the 18th floor. Allison approached the reception desk with what she hoped was professional confidence rather than the anxiety churning beneath her calm exterior. I'm Allison Reed. I'm here for the Liberty Center staff meeting. The receptionist smiled warmly. Yes, Ms. Reed. Mr. Harrison said to expect you. The conference room is just down the hall, third door on the right. The floors are all level, but please let me know if you need any assistance. Allison appreciated the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of her wheelchair without making it the focus of the interaction. The conference room was already half full when Allison entered. A diverse group of professionals sat around a large table, several engaged in pre-meeting conversation. David stood at the head of the table, reviewing documents with a woman in a crisp pantsuit. He looked up as Allison wheeled in, his expression brightening. Allison, glad you could make it. Let me introduce you to the team. He guided her around the table, making introductions. Elena Morales, lead architect. Carlos Reyes, project manager, whom you met yesterday. Dr. Samira Patel, our medical director. Marcus Chen, finance director. Allison shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, noting the genuine interest as David explained her potential role as patient advocate consultant. No one seemed surprised or confused by her presence, suggesting David had already discussed her involvement with the team. The meeting proceeded efficiently, covering construction timelines, funding allocations, and staffing plans. Allison listened attentively, occasionally making notes when topics related to patient experience arose. David led the discussion with calm authority, demonstrating a detailed understanding of both the technical and human aspects of the project. This wasn't a vanity project or a tax write-off. He was deeply invested in the center's success. When we spoke with our major donors last week, Patel was explaining they expressed particular interest in our planned peer support programs. Allison, I wonder if you might share your thoughts on what makes for effective peer mentorship in a rehabilitation context. Allison hesitated, caught off guard by the direct question, but then found herself speaking with unexpected confidence. The best peer support programs recognize that every patient's journey is unique, while still providing practical insights from shared experience. When I was in rehabilitation, I benefited most from mentors who could offer specific strategies for navigating daily life, how to transfer safely from wheelchair to car, how to advocate for yourself with medical providers who might dismiss your concerns. The psychological component is critical too. Having someone who understands the grieving process for the life you thought you would have. She paused, surprised by her own eloquence on a topic she rarely discussed so openly. There should be a balance of hope and realism. False optimism can be as damaging as no hope at all. The room had gone quiet, everyone focused on her words. Allison felt a moment of self-consciousness, worried she had overstepped. That's exactly the perspective we need, David said, breaking the silence. This is why patient advocacy is central to our mission, not peripheral. Her patron nodded in agreement. Would you be comfortable helping us develop the peer support program framework? Your insights would be invaluable. The rest of the meeting continued with Allison increasingly integrated into the discussions. By the time they wrapped up, she had contributed to conversations about therapy room design, outpatient program structure, and community outreach plans. David walked her to the elevator afterward, his expression thoughtful. You made quite an impression, he said. The team doesn't usually warm up to newcomers so quickly. You've clearly thought a lot about these issues. Allison shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I've had 2 years to think about what works and what doesn't in rehabilitation. But I'm surprised you've assembled such a comprehensive team already, before the facility is even complete. David pushed the elevator button for the lobby. The physical building is important, but the programs and people make the real difference. Catherine taught me that. The best facility in the world won't help if the staff isn't trained in both medical best practices and human compassion. The elevator doors opened, and a striking woman in her 60s stepped out. Elegant in a tailored wool coat, her silver-streaked dark hair swept into a perfect chignon. David, there you are. I've been calling your office. Her gaze fell on Allison, taking in the wheelchair with a barely perceptible shift in expression. Oh, I didn't realize you were in a meeting. David tensed slightly. Mother, this is Allison Reed. She's consulting on the Liberty Center project. Allison, my mother, Victoria Harrison. Victoria extended a manicured hand. How lovely to meet you. David has been so consumed with his project, I hardly see him these days. The pleasantry was delivered with perfect politeness, but Allison detected an undercurrent of assessment in the older woman's gaze. I was just leaving, Allison said, sensing the complicated dynamics at play. "It was nice meeting you, Mrs. Harrison." Victoria smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "Please call me Victoria. Any friend of David's is a friend of mine. Are you attending the Foundation Gala next month? It's our major fundraiser for the center." Allison glanced at David, uncertain how to respond. "We haven't discussed that yet," David said, a hint of caution in his tone. "The guest list is still being finalized." "Well, I'm sure Ms. Reed would be a welcome addition," Victoria said smoothly. "After all, it's important to demonstrate the center's commitment to serving diverse needs." The words were appropriate, but something in her delivery made them feel less than genuine. Allison had encountered this type of carefully cloaked condescension before. People who said the right things while subtly reinforcing differences. David's jaw tightened. "Mother, I have a meeting with Marcus about the budget in 5 minutes. Can we catch up later?" Allison used the moment to maneuver her wheelchair into the waiting elevator. "It was lovely meeting you, Victoria. I look forward to hearing more about the gala. David, I'll review those documents and get back to you tomorrow." The doors closed before either Harrison could respond, leaving Allison alone with her racing thoughts. The brief encounter with Victoria Harrison had shifted something in Allison's perception. The potential complexity of her involvement with the Liberty Center, and by extension, with David and Sophie, had suddenly become clearer. This wasn't simply about a professional opportunity. She was stepping into a family dynamic she didn't fully understand, involving a wealthy, influential family with their own history and expectations. As the elevator descended, Allison's phone buzzed with a text from David. "I apologize for my mother's behavior. She means well but can be traditional in her thinking. Please don't let it affect your decision about the consultant position. We truly value your perspective." Allison stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The professional opportunity remained compelling. The personal complications were growing by the day. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, she had composed a reply. "No need to apologize. I've encountered far worse. I'm still reviewing the offer and will let you know my decision soon." Outside, the autumn afternoon had turned gray, threatening rain. Allison zipped her jacket higher as she navigated toward the parking garage. A life of careful control and limited interactions had been comfortable in its predictability. Now, in the span of just a few days, that careful structure was being challenged by unexpected connections. A precocious 6-year-old who drew winged wheelchairs, a widowed CEO building a legacy for his late wife, and the promising but complicated opportunity to contribute to something meaningful. The first raindrops began to fall as Allison reached her car. Thursday's art lesson with Sophie loomed in her mind, another step deeper into the Harrison family orbit. The sensible choice would be to cancel, to create distance before emotions complicated a potential professional relationship. Instead, Allison found herself looking forward to it with an anticipation that felt almost foreign after 2 years of carefully managed expectations. At home, she opened her closet and studied the pale blue dress that had witnessed both rejection and unexpected connection just days earlier. Hanging beside it was the gray blazer she'd worn to today's meeting, representing the professional opportunity before her. Two paths, both uncertain, both requiring courage she wasn't sure she possessed. Or perhaps they were the same path, leading somewhere she couldn't yet envision. Allison wheeled to her desk and opened her laptop. The search bar beckoned. After a moment's hesitation, she typed, "Harrison Technologies CEO David Harrison." Dozens of results appeared. Business profiles, news articles about company acquisitions and philanthropic initiatives, photos of David at industry events. She clicked through several, piecing together a more complete picture of the man she was considering working with. His professional accomplishments were impressive. Harrison Technologies had grown from a small software development firm to a major player in adaptive technology under his leadership. The Liberty Center was just one of several philanthropic projects the company supported. David himself was described as brilliant but private, rarely granting interviews or making public appearances outside of necessary business functions. A headline from 2 years earlier caught her attention. Tech CEO David Harrison mourns wife's passing, establishes MS Research Fund. The article included a photo of David and Catherine at a charity event, she in a wheelchair, he standing beside her with a protective hand on her shoulder. Despite her illness, Catherine's smile was radiant. David looked at her with unmistakable love. Allison closed the browser, suddenly uncomfortable with her research. This wasn't just professional due diligence anymore. It felt invasive, peering into grief that deserved privacy. Yet the image lingered in her mind, the way David had looked at Catherine. It helped explain his understanding of loss, his commitment to the rehabilitation center, perhaps even his kindness to a stranger in a cafe. Her phone buzzed with another text. Sophie this time, sent from David's phone. Miss Allison, I practiced my elephants. They still look a little like potatoes, but better potatoes. Can't wait for art class on Thursday. Followed by a second message from David. Sorry for the Sophie interruption. She insisted on texting you her art progress. No pressure to respond. Allison smiled despite her complicated thoughts. Tell Sophie her enthusiasm is the most important ingredient for becoming a good artist. Her potatoes will be elephants before she knows it. Looking forward to Thursday. The simple exchange settled something in her mind. Whatever complexities lay ahead, professional, personal, or the increasingly blurry space between, she would face them step by step, beginning with an art lesson for an eager 6-year-old. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows. Allison wheeled to her bookshelf and pulled down an old art instruction book from her college days, when she'd taken drawing classes as a counterbalance to the physical intensity of gymnastics training. She began making notes for Sophie's lesson, finding unexpected pleasure in planning how to teach basic portraiture to a child. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Allison felt her world expanding rather than contracting. New connections, new possibilities, new uncertainties to navigate. A text notification lit up her phone screen. David again. One last thing. Sophie is hoping you can stay for dinner after the art lesson. Her words. Tell Miss Allison I'll make sure Daddy doesn't burn anything this time. No obligation at all, just an offer. Allison stared at the message, feeling the weight of the choice before her. A simple dinner invitation that represented so much more. A tentative step toward connection she had carefully avoided for 2 years. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for several seconds before typing. I'd like that. Tell Sophie I trust her supervision skills in the kitchen. As the evening deepened into night, Allison found herself thinking of Sophie's crayon drawing. The wheelchair with wings, the impossible made possible through a child's imagination. Perhaps some boundaries were meant to be reconsidered. Some risks worth taking. Thursday's dinner now stood as a milestone on a path she hadn't planned to travel, but suddenly found herself curious to explore. Thursday arrived with unexpected nervousness fluttering in Allison's stomach. The art lesson with Sophie had seemed straightforward when she'd agreed to it, but now it represented something more significant, a deliberate step into the Harrison family's world beyond professional consultation. She packed her art supplies with careful consideration, selecting materials appropriate for a 6-year-old's skill level while challenging enough to hold interest. The Harrison home surprised her. Given David's wealth, she had expected an ostentatious mansion. Instead, she found a thoughtfully renovated craftsman in a leafy neighborhood, large but welcoming, with a gently sloped path to the front door that accommodated her wheelchair without making accessibility a conspicuous afterthought. Before she could ring the bell, Sophie flung the door open, bouncing on her toes in excitement. Miss Allison, you're here. I set up all my art stuff in the sunroom. Sophie grabbed the handle of Allison's wheelchair, then caught herself. Is it okay if I help push you? Daddy says we should always ask before helping someone. The child's consideration touched Allison deeply. You can help, but let me show you how to do it properly. She demonstrated the correct way to assist with her chair without taking away her control. The sunroom at the back of the house bathed in late afternoon light, perfect for drawing. Sophie had indeed prepared for their session, arranging paper, pencils, and her stuffed animal collection as a still life subject. Mr. Trunks gets to be in the front because he's my oldest friend. But Allison Elephant gets to be next to him because she's named after you. David appeared in the doorway, laptop in hand, apparently in the middle of a work call. His eyes met Allison's over Sophie's head, a silent apology in his expression. He covered the microphone. I need to finish this call. 20 minutes tops. Everything you need should be here, but text if you need anything. He disappeared back into what appeared to be a home office, his voice resuming the professional tone of someone managing a crisis. Sophie seemed unfazed by her father's partial presence. He always has one more call, she explained with the weariness of someone much older. But he promised to make spaghetti for dinner, and he never breaks food promises. Allison began the art lesson showing Sophie how to sketch a basic face shape and place features in correct proportion. The child's focus was impressive, her determination to master each technique evident in her furrowed brow. An hour into the lesson, David reappeared, his tie loosened, looking more relaxed. Sophie proudly held up her self-portrait, still childlike but showing marked improvement over her previous attempts. "See, Daddy, I drew my face and it doesn't look like a potato with hair." David crouched beside his daughter, studying the drawing with genuine appreciation. "That's amazing progress, Soph. You've captured your smile perfectly." He glanced at Allison over Sophie's curls. "Thank you for this. She's been talking about nothing else for days." Allison waved away his gratitude. "She's a good student, eager to learn, not afraid to make mistakes." Those are the most important qualities for any artist. Sophie tugged at David's sleeve. "Can Miss Allison see my room before dinner? I want to show her my books." David looked to Allison for confirmation. "Only if you'd like to. Our house isn't perfectly accessible, but we have a small elevator to the second floor. Catherine needed it during her later stages." Allison nodded, curious about this more personal glimpse into their lives. The compact home elevator opened directly across from Sophie's bedroom, a cheerful space dominated by bookshelves and a window seat overlooking the backyard maple tree. The walls featured framed children's artwork and photographs. Sophie proudly showed Allison her treasures, a collection of rocks, a shelf of well-loved books, a music box that played what Sophie described as Mommy's special song. Allison noticed a photograph on Sophie's nightstand, a woman with laughing eyes cradling an infant Sophie, David's arm around them both. "That's my mommy," Sophie explained, picking up the frame with careful hands. "Daddy says I have her smile and her stubbornness. She was an art teacher at my school, but then she got sick and had to stop teaching." David appeared in the doorway, his expression a complex blend of love and sorrow. "The timing of Catherine's diagnosis had been especially cruel," he explained quietly. "Just 6 months after Sophie was born." The dinner that followed carried an unexpected warmth. David had indeed prepared spaghetti, complete with garlic bread and a simple salad. Sophie chatted throughout the meal about her school, her friends, and her artistic aspirations. "I think I want to be an art teacher like Mommy, and a business person like Daddy. Then I can teach art and have money to build places like the Liberty Center." David laughed at his daughter's ambitious plans. "Sounds like you've got it all figured out, Soph." As David cleared the plates, refusing Allison's offers to help, Sophie's expression grew serious. "Miss Allison, are you going to direct our friend now? Not just for art lessons, but for real?" The directness of the question caught Allison off guard. "I'd like that," she answered carefully. "Would you like that?" Sophie nodded emphatically. "Yes, Daddy smiles more when you're here. He doesn't check his phone every 5 minutes." Before Allison could process this revelation, David returned with a tray holding coffee and a small plate of cookies. "Sophie, time for your bath and bedtime story. Say goodnight to Miss Allison." The little girl gave Allison a fierce hug before racing upstairs, leaving the adults in a moment of charged silence. "She's very attached to you already," David said, pouring coffee into delicate cups that seemed at odds with his masculine presence. "I hope that's not uncomfortable for you." Allison accepted the coffee, gathering her thoughts. "She's a special child, but I'm concerned about managing expectations, both hers and mine." The connection they'd formed happened with startling speed, and she worried about the inevitable complications. David nodded, understanding in his eyes. For what it's worth, Sophie doesn't warm up to people easily. After Catherine died, she withdrew completely for months. Your presence in her life, even briefly, has been significant. The conversation shifted to the Liberty Center project, neutral ground that allowed them both to retreat from more personal topics. David described the challenges they faced with funding and regulatory approvals, his passion for the project evident in every word. "We're not just building a physical therapy center. We're creating a community where people don't feel defined by their limitations, where the focus is on possibilities rather than constraints." The vision resonated with Allison in unexpected ways, articulating hopes she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. David walked Allison to her car after dinner, the evening air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. At her car, he hesitated. I know my mother made things awkward yesterday. She's protective and not always in helpful ways. But I wanted to let you know that the Liberty Center Board is hosting a gala fundraiser next month. As our patient advocate consultant, assuming you accept the position, your presence would be valuable. His tone remained professional, but his eyes held a question beyond the formal invitation. I'll think about it, Alvison promised, both of them aware she was responding to more than just the gala invitation. The evening had revealed layers of connection neither had anticipated: professional respect, Sophie's affection, and something more personal hovering between them. Unacknowledged but increasingly difficult to ignore. The following week brought structure to their emerging relationship. Allison accepted the consultant position, establishing regular hours at the Harrison Technologies offices, reviewing plans for the Liberty Center. The work engaged her mind and rekindled professional confidence she'd thought lost after the accident. David maintained respectful boundaries during their work interactions, their personal connection evident only in small moments. A shared glance when someone made a particularly insightful comment, coffee appearing on her desk in her preferred mug, a text checking if the meeting room temperature was comfortable for her. Sophie's art lessons continued weekly, their relationship deepening through creativity and conversation. The little girl's drawings grew more sophisticated under Allison's guidance, her confidence blossoming with each small success. One Thursday, as they worked side by side on landscape sketches, Sophie's art teacher from school appeared for a parent-teacher conference David had forgotten to mention. Jensen observed their session with professional interest, commenting on Sophie's improved technique. You have a real gift for teaching, Ms. Reed. Mrs. Jensen studied Allison's patient guidance as Sophie struggled with perspective. Have you considered art therapy? With your background in physical training and your personal experience with physical challenges, you'd bring valuable insight to the field. The suggestion caught Allison by surprise, opening a door she hadn't known existed. The idea lingered, taking root in her imagination as a possible path forward. That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Allison found herself alone with David in his home office, discussing Liberty Center plans that had somehow transitioned to more personal matters. The hours of her physical therapy center job had been cut again, making the consulting position her primary income. David's concern was evident, though he was careful not to overstep with offers of help that might feel like charity. Miss Jensen mentioned art therapy as a potential career path, Allison confided, surprised at herself for sharing the nascent idea. David considered this with characteristic thoughtfulness. The Liberty Center will have an art therapy program. I could introduce you to the director if you're interested in exploring the field. Not as a shortcut, just as a starting point for your own research. His careful distinction between helpful connection and presumptuous intervention demonstrated his growing understanding of her fierce independence. October slipped into November, the Liberty Center taking shape both physically and programmatically under their collaborative efforts. Allison's role expanded beyond accessibility consultation to include program development, her insights respected by the entire team. Only Victoria Harrison maintained a cool distance during board meetings, her perfect politeness masking continued skepticism about Allison's involvement. After one particularly productive meeting, Victoria cornered her son in the conference room, unaware that Allison remained within earshot around the corner, gathering her materials. Darling, you're spending an awful lot of time with this consultant. People are starting to talk. David's irritation was palpable even from Allison's hidden position. People can talk all they want, Mother. Allison is a valuable member of this team. Her voice took on a softer, more concerned tone. Is this about Catherine? Are you trying to fill that void? Because attaching yourself to a woman in similar circumstances won't bring her back. The silence that followed felt weighted with tension. When David finally spoke, his voice carried a controlled anger Allison had never heard before. This has nothing to do with Catherine. Allison is her own person, with her own strengths and perspective. The fact that they both used wheelchairs is coincidental, not definitive. I would appreciate if you would extend her the same professional courtesy you show everyone else on this project. Allison wheeled away silently, not wanting to be discovered eavesdropping. Victoria's words echoed uncomfortably, articulating fears Allison herself had harbored, that David's interest stemmed from misplaced grief or rescuer fantasies rather than genuine connection. She texted him later canceling their planned review session, citing a physical therapy appointment she'd forgotten. Distance suddenly seemed necessary while she processed what she'd overheard. The community center near Allison's apartment offered an unexpected distraction from her troubled thoughts. A flyer in the lobby sought volunteers for a children's art program, specifically mentioning interest in instructors with experience teaching children with disabilities. The timing felt serendipitous, offering a way to explore art instruction beyond Sophie's private lessons. The program director's enthusiasm upon learning of Allison's gymnastics coaching, background, and current work with the Liberty Center sealed the opportunity. Within days, she found herself leading a Saturday morning class for children with various physical challenges. The work brought unexpected joy. These children approached art with determination that resonated deeply with Allison's own experience of rebuilding life after physical trauma. Their creativity flourished under her guidance, her understanding of physical limitations allowing her to adapt techniques for each child's abilities. After the third successful session, the program director approached with a proposition. Would she consider developing a formal art therapy component for their winter program? The position would be part-time but paid, with support for required certification courses. The offer represented a potential new direction, one arising from her own talents rather than connections to the Harrison family. Allison accepted with a sense of reclaiming her own narrative. This path was hers alone, independent of David's influence or resources. The decision brought clarity and a measure of peace, though her thoughts still drifted to him and Sophie more often than she cared to admit. David respected her sudden need for space, limiting communication to necessary project matters while maintaining warmth in their interactions. His restraint spoke volumes about his understanding of her complex feelings. When they did meet for Liberty Center business, their professional rapport remained strong despite the emotional undercurrents neither acknowledged directly. One evening, working late at the Liberty Center construction site reviewing accessibility features with the installation team, they found themselves alone after the contractors departed. David looked exhausted, the strain of balancing the project with his company responsibilities and single parenthood evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "You should rest," Allison said gently, recognizing the signs of burnout she'd seen in rehabilitation patients pushing too hard. "This place will still be here tomorrow." He sank onto a bench beside her wheelchair, running a hand through his hair. "Sophie asked me last night if I was going to live at the office when the center opens. Apparently, I've been extra busy and extra serious lately." The guilt in his voice was palpable, the struggle to balance competing responsibilities all too familiar to Allison from her own parents' efforts to support her athletic career while managing demanding jobs. The moment stretched between them, both tired enough that usual defenses had lowered. "Sometimes I wonder what Catherine would think of all this," David confessed, gesturing to the half-finished center around them. "If she would see it as meaningful or just insufficient. A poor substitute for actually being here with Sophie." For the first time, he spoke of his late wife without careful self-editing, revealing the raw edges of grief still present beneath his composed exterior. "I'm trying to build something lasting from our loss, but some days it feels like I'm just running from the emptiness." Allison wheeled closer, allowing her hand to rest briefly on his arm, the first deliberate physical contact she'd initiated between them. "She's still here in the ways that matter most. In Sophie's smile, in your dedication to this place, in the love that's driving you to make meaning from pain. Those aren't small things, David. That's how we keep going." The words emerged from her own journey through loss, not of a person, but of a future she'd once taken for granted. He covered her hand with his, a simple gesture that somehow contained multitudes. "Thank you for seeing that. For seeing me, not just the CEO or Sophie's dad or Catherine's widower, just me with all my contradictions and uncertainties." Their eyes met in shared understanding, the moment suspended between them until David's phone shattered the silence with its insistent buzzing. The board chairman's number flashed on the screen, forcing him to answer despite the late hour. Allison withdrew her hand as David walked a few paces away, his posture shifting back into business mode. She caught fragments of conversation, budget concerns, investor questions, timeline adjustments. When he returned, the vulnerable moment had passed, professional masks firmly back in place. That was Richard Collins, our chairman. He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Apparently, there are concerns about project scope and funding allocation. The following morning's board meeting crackled with tension from the moment Allison entered the conference room. Richard Collins, a silver-haired man with the confident bearing of old money, dominated the head of the table. His gaze lingered on Allison with poorly disguised skepticism as David introduced her as part of the presentation team. Victoria sat beside Richard, her expression unreadable, but posture rigid with disapproval. David's presentation on construction progress and program development reflected their weeks of collaborative work. His acknowledgement of Allison's contributions generous, but professionally appropriate. As questions arose about specific accessibility features, he deferred to her expertise without hesitation, their professional rapport evident in their seamless exchanges. This natural collaboration appeared to disturb Richard, whose interruptions grew increasingly pointed. Ms. Reed, Richard finally addressed her directly. While these design elements are certainly thorough, the board has concerns about their practical implementation within our budget constraints. Perhaps your personal experience is creating a bias toward over-accommodation? The question carried a subtle barb beneath its professional veneer. David started to intervene, but Allison caught his eye with a slight shake of her head. This was her battle to fight. Mr. Collins, Allison's voice remained steady despite the anger simmering beneath. These aren't accommodations, they're basic requirements for equal access. And they'll save money long-term by preventing retrofitting costs and potential ADA compliance issues. The research supporting these design choices is in your packet, including cost-benefit analyses for each feature. My personal experience informs my expertise, but my recommendations are based on evidence, not emotion. Her calm rebuttal seemed to frustrate Richard more than anger would have. As the meeting progressed, his comments grew increasingly personal, culminating in a remark that silenced the room. I wonder, David, if your personal interest in Ms. Reed might be clouding your judgment regarding her recommendations. The accusation hung in the air, its implication impossible to ignore. Victoria's slight nod of agreement confirmed her collusion in this line of attack. David's response came with dangerous quietness. Allison Reed was selected for this position because of her qualifications. Her insights have improved this project immeasurably. If anyone has allowed personal feelings to interfere with professional judgment, Richard, I suggest you examine your own resistance to expertise that challenges your preconceptions. The tension between the men was palpable. Years of working relationships stretched to breaking point over this conflict. After the meeting, Allison wheeled rapidly toward the elevator, needing distance from the toxic boardroom dynamics. David caught up with her in the hallway, his expression a mixture of anger and apology. Richard was completely out of line. I'll speak with him privately. Allison shook her head, emotions threatening to overwhelm her careful composure. This is exactly what I was afraid of. I'm not your project or your cause, David. I won't be used as a weapon in whatever power struggle is happening in your boardroom. He stepped back, visibly stung by her response. Is that what you think? That I see you as a project? After all these weeks working together? The hurt in his voice nearly broke through her defensive anger, but Victoria's earlier words echoed too loudly to ignore. I don't know what you see when you look at me, David, and that's the problem. Their conversation ended unresolved, the elevator doors closing between them like a period on an incomplete sentence. The Liberty Center Gala arrived 2 weeks later, the tension between Allison and David still unresolved. Despite her misgivings, Allison's professional commitment to the project demanded her presence. She dressed with particular care, a midnight blue gown adapted for wheelchair wear, hair swept into an elegant updo. The museum hosting the event had been transformed for the evening, the rehabilitation center's architectural models and program information displayed among priceless artworks. Victoria spotted her immediately upon arrival, approaching with the determined smile of someone executing a social obligation. Allison, how lovely you could join us. The patient perspective is so important for our donors to understand. The comment landed precisely on the line between appropriate recognition and subtle diminishment. Allison matched Victoria's smile with equal insincerity. I'm happy to represent that perspective, though I'm here primarily as the project's accessibility consultant. David appeared at his mother's elbow, resplendent in a tuxedo that emphasized his athletic build. "Allison, you look beautiful." The art installation in the East Gallery features several pieces addressing disability themes. "I thought you might find them interesting." His mother's expression tightened at this pointed redirection, but she maintained her social smile as she excused herself to greet arriving board members. The evening progressed with the careful choreography of high society fundraising: cocktails, speeches, discreet checkbook openings. Allison navigated the crowd with practiced ease, discussing the center's programs with potential donors who seemed genuinely interested in her perspective. David maintained a professional distance, their interactions cordial, but lacking the warmth that had developed over weeks of collaboration. The space between them felt both necessary and painful. While examining a sculpture in a quiet corner of the museum, Allison overheard two women talking nearby, unaware of her presence behind the large installation. "That's David Harrison over there," one said. "The tech investor. I heard he's been dating someone. Apparently she's disabled, in a wheelchair." "How noble of him," the other replied, her voice dripping with something Allison couldn't quite name. "Guess he's working through his grief by saving someone else. It's very philanthropic." Her friend agreed with an audible smirk. "Like his rehab center project. Everything's a mission with him now." The words landed like physical blows. Every insecurity Allison had harbored about David's interest crystallized in these strangers' casual cruelty. She maneuvered her wheelchair away from the sculpture, desperate to escape before the women realized she had overheard them. David caught sight of her rapid exit and followed, concern evident in his expression when he caught up in the museum's quiet side gallery. "What happened? Are you all right?" Allison's hands gripped her wheels tightly, emotion threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. "Is that what I am to you?" The words came out sharper than intended, fueled by hurt and the accumulated weight of doubt. "Your redemption project? The woman in the wheelchair you get to save so you feel better about not being able to save Catherine?" David looked as though she'd struck him, his expression shifting from concern to shocked pain. "What are you talking about? I heard people talking about how noble you are for dating someone disabled, about how this is all part of your mission to rescue broken people." Allison's voice cracked despite her efforts to maintain control. "I thought you understood. I thought you saw me as more than this chair. But maybe I'm just another center to build, another charity case to fix." Her words emerged from the deepest insecurities that had haunted her since the accident. The fear that she would never again be seen as a complete person, only as a symbol of tragedy or inspiration. "That's not true." David's voice was raw with emotion. "You're not a project. You're not charity. You're someone who makes me laugh, who calls me out when I'm being ridiculous. Someone who taught my daughter that strength comes in different forms." "But that's just it," Allison countered, tears threatening now. "You see strength in my wheelchair. Everyone does. I'm inspirational, Allison. Brave Allison. Look how well she's coping. But I don't want to be your inspiration. I don't want to be the symbol of your healing. I just want to be a person someone chooses because they actually want me, not because I make them feel good about themselves." "I do want you," David insisted, desperation bleeding through his usual composure. "Not because you're in a wheelchair, not in spite of it, because you're you." But Allison was already moving toward the exit, putting distance between them. She could hear him calling her name but didn't stop. She couldn't because if she stopped, she might start believing him, and that possibility terrified her more than being alone. Allison spent the week after the gala avoiding David's calls. Each message notification sent a jolt of emotion through her, anger mingled with longing she refused to acknowledge. The Liberty Center consultant work continued remotely. Professionalism demanded that much. But she created distance wherever possible, sending reports via email rather than attending meetings, citing scheduling conflicts that weren't entirely fabricated. Her community center art classes provided a welcome distraction, the children's uncomplicated enthusiasm pulling her away from the tangled emotions David inspired. Her best friend Maya arrived uninvited on Friday evening, armed with takeout and determined expression. "I've been texting you for days. What's going on?" Allison hesitated, then unlocked the floodgates. The story poured out. David, Sophie, the gala, the overheard conversation. With each revelation, she expected Maya's sympathy. Instead, her friend's expression grew increasingly exasperated. "Let me get this straight," Maya said, setting down her chopsticks. "You've spent 2 years keeping everyone at arm's length. Then you meet a guy who treats you like a complete person, whose kid adores you, who offers you meaningful work. And you're pushing him away because some random women at a party made catty remarks?" Allison bristled at the oversimplification. "It's more complicated than that. His mother basically accused him of replacing his wife with another woman in a wheelchair. The board chairman implied our relationship is clouding his judgment. Even he admitted he's trying to create meaning from Catherine's death through the rehabilitation center. How do I know I'm not just part of that mission?" Maya leaned forward, her gaze unflinching. "How does anyone ever know why someone chooses them? We're all walking wounded, Allison. Everyone has history, baggage, complicated reasons for their choices. The question isn't whether his interest in you is connected to his past. Of course it is, just like your hesitation is connected to yours. The question is whether what's between you has enough substance to stand on its own, regardless of how it started." Allison had no ready answer, Maya's perspective cutting through her protective anger with uncomfortable precision. That night, unable to sleep, Allison wheeled onto her small patio. Stars punctured the clear November sky, distant and indifferent to human complexity below. She found herself sketching in the dim light, not Sophie's portrait or Liberty Center plans, but images from her own imagination. Women in wheelchairs doing impossible things, flying through clouds, climbing mountains, swimming through galaxies. The images flowed from some untapped creative wellspring, her hands moving almost without conscious direction. Dawn found her surrounded by sketches, exhausted but somehow lighter. The drawings captured something essential, not inspiration porn for the able-bodied, but authentic visions of possibility that transcended physical limitation without denying its reality. She photographed each piece carefully, then sent them to her email, the beginning of an idea taking shape in her mind. The community center welcomed her proposal for an expanded art therapy program with enthusiasm. "We've been hoping to develop something like this," the director confided. "Your background in athletics and rehabilitation gives you unique insight. The position would start part-time but could grow with the program." The opportunity represented a path forward independent of David and the Liberty Center, a chance to build something entirely her own. Sophie's text arrived unexpectedly the following Tuesday. "Miss Allison, why did you disappear? Daddy is sad and won't talk about it. Did we do something wrong?" The child's directness pierced Allison's carefully constructed defenses. She stared at the message, imagining Sophie borrowing her father's phone, concern in her young eyes. "No, sweetie, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out. I've been busy with a new art program, but I miss our lessons." The reply felt inadequate, but was the most honest answer she could offer. 3 days later, a courier arrived at Allison's apartment with a package. Inside lay 3 professionally bound children's books. The illustrations were hers. The sketches she'd left at David's house during art lessons with Sophie, scanned and transformed into stories. The first book told the tale of a girl in a wheelchair who discovered she could fly when she stopped trying to be like everyone else. The second depicted a woman who climbed mountains on wheels because altitude doesn't care how you got there. The third explored finding strength in unexpected places. At the bottom of the box rested a handwritten letter. "Allison, you once told Sophie that flowers don't fix everything. You were right. These books won't fix anything either. But I wanted you to see what I see when I look at your art. You didn't just inspire me. You inspired a world I didn't know I needed. A world where Sophie can see herself in stories, where strength looks different than what we're told to expect. You gave that to us, not because you're in a wheelchair, because you're brave enough to imagine something better. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking you to know that you were never a project. You were always just Allison." And that was always more than enough. "David." Allison traced the book's covers with trembling fingers. The production quality was professional, proper binding, ISBN numbers, publishing information. He hadn't merely printed her sketches. He'd transformed them into legitimate books that could reach children beyond Sophie. The gesture struck her speechless. This wasn't charity or pity. This was recognition of value she'd created, amplified through his resources but not diminished by his involvement. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps her fierce independence had prevented her from distinguishing between being helped and being valued. She sat on her apartment floor surrounded by the books, unexpected tears spilling down her cheeks. Not sad tears, but something closer to relief. The kind that comes when you've been holding something tight for too long and finally let it go. She picked up her phone and typed a message that took 3 attempts to get right. "You didn't fix me. You made me feel whole." His response came within seconds. "Coffee tomorrow. Just us. No gallery, no audience. Just 2 people who see each other." Allison smiled through her tears. "Just 2 people," she replied. "I'd like that." They met at the same cafe where everything had started. Allison arrived first, deliberately choosing a table in the center of the room rather than tucked in a corner. She wasn't hiding anymore. David walked in exactly on time, carrying 2 cups, one from the cafe next door. "I know you like the coffee here better," he said as he sat down, sliding 1 cup toward her. "But I also know you have a secret addiction to their vanilla lattes, so I hedged my bets." Allison accepted the cup, touched that he'd remembered such a small detail, mentioned it only once in passing. "Thank you," she said, "for the coffee and for the books. Sophie's been sleeping with hers under her pillow," David replied. "She makes me read The Flying One every night, sometimes twice. She's the reason you had them made, isn't she?" David nodded. "She asked me why your drawings were just sitting on paper when they should be in real books. I didn't have a good answer, so I found someone who could make it happen." Allison wrapped her hands around the warm cup, gathering courage for what needed to be said. "I'm sorry for what I said at the gallery about you trying to save me." "You weren't entirely wrong," David admitted quietly. "After Catherine died, I did throw myself into projects. The rehabilitation center, work, anything that felt like forward motion. But Allison, you were never one of those projects. You were something else entirely." "What was I then?" David took a breath, his expression vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "You were the first person in 2 years who made me feel like maybe I could be more than just a father and a businessman going through the motions. You saw me as a whole person, not the grieving widower, not the generous philanthropist. Just David, the guy who drinks too much coffee and falls asleep during bedtime stories." Something in Allison's chest cracked open at his words, a barrier dissolving. "I've spent 2 years waiting for people to see past the wheelchair, to see Allison instead of the disabled woman," she confessed. "And then when you did that, when you actually saw me, I panicked. Because if you really saw me and still chose me, then I couldn't blame the wheelchair anymore. I'd have to actually be vulnerable." "Vulnerability is terrifying," David agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "So is this," Allison said, gesturing between them. "Whatever this is becoming, what do you want it to become?" The question hung in the air between them, the cafe humming with quiet conversation around them, while Allison felt they existed in their own small pocket of space. "I want it to be real," she said finally. "Not you rescuing me, not me being your inspiration. Just 2 people who choose each other." David reached across the table, his hand palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. Allison placed her hand in his. "Just 2 people. I can do that." The weeks that followed weren't perfect. Allison still had moments when old fears crept back, when she wondered if she was too much work, too complicated. David had days when grief for Catherine hit unexpectedly and he withdrew into himself. They learned to navigate these moments together, to give each other space while staying connected. Sophie remained the unlikely architect of their relationship, insisting that Allison come to her 6th birthday party, declaring that no celebration was complete without all her favorite people present. Allison helped decorate for the party, hanging streamers from her wheelchair, while Sophie supervised with the serious expression of someone managing a major event. "Higher on the left," Sophie instructed, perched on a chair for better viewing angle. "It has to be perfect." "You're a tough boss," Allison teased, adjusting the streamer to Sophie's exacting standards. "Daddy says I get it from Mommy," Sophie responded, climbing down from her chair. "He says Mommy always knew exactly how things should be." Allison had learned more about Catherine over the months, that she'd been brilliant with children, patient in ways David admitted he wasn't, that she'd fought her illness with both grace and fury, refusing to let it define her until the very end. I think your mommy would be proud of you, Allison said gently. Sophie considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Daddy says mommy would like you. He told Grandma that you would have been friends. The child's casual revelation sent warmth spreading through Allison's chest, the idea that David could imagine her and Catherine connecting rather than replacing one with the other. David appeared in the doorway carrying a box of party supplies, catching the tail end of their conversation. You're exactly like her in the best ways, he told Sophie, his expression softening. He caught Allison's eye over his daughter's head, and the look they shared held layers of understanding. This wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about making room for something new while honoring what came before. The party proved chaotic and joyful. 12 6-year-olds racing through the backyard, cake smashed into laughing faces, presents torn open with gleeful abandon. Allison found herself laughing more than she had in years, caught up in the simple pleasure of Sophie's happiness. When the last guest departed and the sun began to set, the three of them sat in the yard surrounded by wrapping paper and deflated balloons, Sophie fighting sleep in David's lap. Best birthday ever, she mumbled, eyes drooping despite her determination to stay awake. Glad it lived up to expectations, David smiled, smoothing her hair. Sophie roused herself slightly to look at Allison. Next year you have to come again. Promise. I promise, Allison said, meaning it completely. After David carried Sophie to bed, he and Allison remained in the backyard. String lights illuminated everything in a soft glow, the November chill held at bay by outdoor heaters. She loves you, David said simply. You know that, right? The feeling's mutual, Allison replied, watching shadows dance across his face. She's an incredible kid. She is, David agreed, reaching for Allison's hand. I love you too, in case that wasn't clear. Allison's heart performed a complicated maneuver in her chest. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building between them for weeks. But hearing the words still hit with unexpected force. I love you too, she said, watching his expression transform with relief and joy. You and your bossy daughter, and your terrible habit of leaving coffee cups everywhere. David laughed, the sound unburdened in a way she'd never heard before. I'm a work in progress, aren't we all? Their first real kiss happened there in the backyard, stars emerging overhead as string lights glowed around them. It felt both inevitable and surprising, comfortable and exhilarating. When they finally broke apart, David rested his forehead against hers. I've been waiting to do that since the first day at the coffee shop. Allison smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Worth the wait. His answering smile carried promises of many more such moments to come. Thanksgiving arrived with unexpected complications. David had planned a quiet dinner with Sophie and his mother, and he tentatively invited Allison to join them. I understand if it's too soon or too awkward, he added hastily. Victoria can be challenging, but you're important to us, and I'd like her to see that. Allison accepted with trepidation, remembering Victoria's previous coolness and the overheard conversation with Richard Collins. The Harrison family home presented an intimidating Georgian facade in Portland's most exclusive neighborhood. Victoria answered the door herself, her greeting polite but reserved as David helped Allison navigate the entrance. Sophie immediately commandeered Allison's attention, pulling her toward the sunroom to show off a new art project. The momentary reprieve from Victoria's scrutiny allowed Allison to gather her composure, but eventually they were called to the formal dining room where Victoria presided over a traditional Thanksgiving spread. Conversation flowed stiffly through appetizers. Victoria's questions to Allison focusing exclusively on her professional background and plans for the Liberty Center Art Therapy program. The deliberate avoidance of personal topics created an unspoken tension that even Sophie seemed to sense, her usual chatter subdued. When Sophie spilled cranberry sauce on the tablecloth, Victoria's sharp intake of breath made the child's eyes fill with tears. Allison intervened instinctively. You know what artists call that? A happy accident. Some of the most beautiful art comes from unexpected spills and mistakes. Here, look. She demonstrated by dipping her napkin corner in the spill and pressing it to create a symmetrical pattern on her plate rim. Sophie's tears vanished as she eagerly imitated the technique, transforming potential drama into an impromptu art lesson. David's grateful glance across the table conveyed volumes, but Victoria's expression remained unreadable. Later, as David and Sophie cleared dishes, Victoria and Allison found themselves momentarily alone in the dining room. I understand you're developing quite a following with your community center art program, Victoria said, her tone impossible to interpret. The children seem very attached to you. The observation, though accurate, carried an undertone that put Allison on alert. They respond to being seen as capable rather than limited, Allison replied carefully. Just as I do. Victoria studied her for a long moment, something shifting in her elegant features. My grandson, David's younger brother's son, has cerebral palsy. He struggled to find activities where he feels successful rather than accommodated. Perhaps your program might interest him. The unexpected personal revelation caught Allison off guard, creating the first crack in Victoria's perfect facade. I'd be happy to work with him, Allison offered, sensing an opportunity for genuine connection. Our winter session starts next month. Victoria nodded, reaching for her wine glass to mask what might have been unexpected emotion. I'll speak with my daughter-in-law. The brief exchange didn't instantly transform their relationship, but it created a foothold for potential understanding, a small bridge across the chasm of Victoria's resistance. December brought accelerated progress on the Liberty Center. The building neared completion, equipment deliveries arrived daily, and staff hiring began in earnest. Allison's role expanded to include development of the art therapy program, working alongside a licensed therapist to create protocols specifically designed for rehabilitation patients. The work energized her, combining her physical training background with her newly discovered passion for therapeutic art. Her community center classes continued growing, with a waiting list developing after local media coverage highlighted their innovative approach. The attention caught the eye of a small gallery owner who specialized in showcasing work from underrepresented artists. She approached Allison after observing one of her classes. "Your perspective is unique," she said bluntly. "Would you consider a small exhibition of your personal work? The flying wheelchair series you're developing has commercial potential beyond children's books." The suggestion seemed laughably ambitious to Allison, who still thought of herself as Sophie's art teacher rather than a legitimate artist. Yet the seed took root, growing alongside her burgeoning confidence. She began staying up late, developing the flying wheelchair concept into more sophisticated pieces that explored the intersection of limitation and possibility. David provided encouragement without pressure, creating space in his home for an impromptu studio where she could work while spending time with him and Sophie. Christmas Eve found the three of them decorating David's living room, holiday music playing softly as Sophie supervised ornament placement on the towering pine. "This one goes higher," Sophie directed, handing Allison a delicate glass star. "It's special because it was Mommy's favorite." The casual inclusion of Catherine in their holiday traditions moved Allison deeply. There was no pretense that Sophie's mother hadn't existed or didn't matter. Instead, her memory was woven naturally into their developing family fabric. Sophie fell asleep early, exhausted from holiday excitement, and determined to give Santa maximum opportunity to visit. David and Allison settled on the couch before the fire, a comfortable silence between them as they watched flames dance. "I have something for you," David said finally, placing a small box in her hand. "It's not what you might think. Not yet, anyway. But I wanted you to have this tonight." Inside lay a key on a simple silver chain. "This house has never been just mine," David explained as Allison examined it. "It was Catherine's home too, then Sophie's and mine together. Now I'm hoping it might become yours as well, whenever you're ready. No timeline, no pressure, just a door that's always open to you." The gesture struck the perfect note, acknowledging their deepening commitment without pushing for definitions or declarations she might not be ready to make. Allison closed her hand around the key, its metal warm against her palm. "You understand me better than anyone ever has," she said simply. "Not because of this chair or despite it, just me, with all my complications and contradictions." "I've never felt that before." David's eyes reflected the firelight as he drew her closer. "That's not a gift I gave you, Allison. That's a gift you gave yourself by letting someone see you completely." "All I did was pay attention." January brought a severe ice storm that paralyzed Portland for 3 days. David and Sophie were at Allison's apartment when the power grid failed, an impromptu dinner visit transforming into an unexpected sleepover as roads became impassable. Allison's small space wasn't designed for 3 people, yet the tight quarters created an intimacy that might otherwise have taken months to develop. They built blanket forts in the living room, told ghost stories by flashlight, and Sophie discovered the joy of indoor camping. On the second powerless night, after Sophie had fallen asleep in her makeshift tent, David and Allison talked for hours in the darkness, their voices low to avoid waking the child. The conversation meandered through childhood memories, professional aspirations, and philosophical questions, the kind of deep exchange often lost in busy daily routines. I used to dream about being in the Olympics, Allison confessed, not just competing, standing on that podium, feeling like all the sacrifice was worth it. After the accident, I thought I'd never feel that kind of purpose again. What about now? David asked, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Now I'm starting to believe there might be different podiums, Allison realized aloud. Different measures of success that aren't any less meaningful. The gallery exhibition, the therapy program, even Sophie's art lessons. They're not consolation prizes. They're just different paths to the same feeling of purpose. David's fingers tightened around hers. That's why I fell in love with you, Not because you overcame adversity, but because you refused to let it define the boundaries of your world. When power returned and life resumed its normal rhythm, something had fundamentally shifted in their relationship. The artificial boundaries Allison had maintained, separate spaces, careful independence, emotional distance, gradually dissolved. Her clothes appeared in David's closet. Her adaptive equipment found permanent homes in his bathroom. Her art supplies established residence in the sunroom. The transition happened naturally without formal discussion, a gradual merging of lives rather than a dramatic declaration. Victoria's grandson Marcus began attending Allison's community center art classes in February, his initial reluctance transforming into enthusiasm as he discovered techniques adapted to his specific abilities. Victoria occasionally observed from the doorway, her expression softening incrementally with each visit. The transformation in her attitude became undeniable when she approached Allison after class one afternoon. "He's different with you," Victoria admitted, watching Marcus proudly display his latest creation to another student. "More confident. I've never seen him volunteer to demonstrate a technique before." The unexpected compliment opened a door to genuine conversation. Over coffee in the center's small cafe, Victoria revealed layers beneath her polished exterior. "I wasn't always supportive of Catherine's relationship with David," she confessed. "I thought she was too bohemian, too unconventional for his world. But she proved me wrong in every way that mattered. When she became ill, she faced it with extraordinary courage. I learned more about strength from my daughter-in-law than from anyone I've ever known." The admission helped Allison understand Victoria's initial resistance. "You saw parallels between Catherine and me, and you were afraid history was repeating itself." Victoria's gaze remained on her coffee cup. "Not just parallels. When I saw how quickly Sophie attached to you, how David looked at you, part of me feared he was trying to recreate what he'd lost instead of truly moving forward." Allison considered this with new empathy. "And now?" Victoria finally met her eyes. "Now I see he's chosen someone entirely different, yet equally strong in her own way. Catherine would approve, I think. She never wanted him to grieve forever." The conversation marked a turning point, not an instant transformation into maternal warmth, but a foundation for mutual respect that might eventually grow into genuine affection. The Liberty Center's official opening arrived in March, a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by local officials, major donors, and media. Allison watched from the front row as David delivered a speech that balanced professional pride with personal mission. "This center exists because one remarkable woman showed me that rehabilitation isn't just about physical recovery. It's about reclaiming dignity, purpose, and joy." Catherine Harrison's legacy lives in every aspect of this facility. Her dream was a place where people would find not just medical treatment, but community, a launching pad for rebuilt lives. His gaze found Allison as he continued. "And through an unexpected coffee shop encounter, we found another visionary who helped shape this center into something beyond our original imagination." Allison Reed's influence is evident in both the physical design and the innovative programs that will serve our community for generations. The Liberty Center stands as proof that our greatest challenges can inspire our greatest contributions, if we're brave enough to keep moving forward. The ceremony concluded with Sophie helping her father cut the ribbon, photographers capturing the moment for local papers. Afterward, as guests toured the completed facility, Allison found herself approached repeatedly by rehabilitation professionals interested in her art therapy program. Word had spread through medical circles about the innovative approach, generating interest from other facilities nationwide. The validation of her professional contribution existed entirely separate from her relationship with David, an achievement that stood firmly on its own merits. April brought final preparations for Allison's gallery exhibition, titled Choosing Flight. The collection included 20 pieces, mixed media works featuring women in wheelchairs doing extraordinary things, flying through clouds, climbing mountains, dancing on city rooftops, swimming through galaxies. Not saccharine inspiration, but powerful imagery that challenged perceptions of disability without denying its reality. The night before the opening, Allison worked late at the gallery, making final adjustments to the display. David arrived with coffee and quiet support, helping hang the last pieces in comfortable silence. Stepping back to survey the completed exhibition, Allison felt a complex emotion wash over her, pride mingled with vulnerability. These images had emerged from her deepest self, revealing both wounds and healing. Tomorrow, strangers would view them, judge them, interpret them through their own lenses. The thought terrified and exhilarated her simultaneously. "You've created something extraordinary here," David said, his voice soft in the quiet gallery. "Not just art, but a new language for talking about possibility." Allison wheeled slowly through the space, seeing her work through fresh eyes. "I started drawing these for myself," she admitted. "A way to imagine beyond limitations without pretending they don't exist. I never thought anyone else would see them, let alone understand what I was trying to express." David knelt beside her wheelchair, bringing them to eye level. "That's the power of art, isn't it? Building bridges between individual experiences, creating spaces where people can recognize parts of themselves in someone else's story." His understanding of what these pieces meant to her only deepened her certainty that what existed between them was genuine. Not rescue or inspiration, but true partnership based on mutual recognition. The exhibition opening exceeded all expectations. The small gallery filled to capacity, attendees spilling onto the sidewalk as word spread through Portland's art community. Sophie appointed herself unofficial tour guide, leading people from piece to piece with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with both the art and artist. "That one's my favorite," she told an older woman, pointing at an illustration of a woman in a wheelchair with wings made of book pages. "Allison says books can help you fly even when your body can't." Victoria arrived midway through the evening, bringing Marcus and, surprisingly, Richard Collins. The board chairman appeared genuinely impressed by the exhibition, his earlier skepticism apparently transformed by the tangible evidence of Allison's talent. "Your vision is extraordinary, Ms. Reed," he acknowledged, studying a piece depicting wheelchair wheels transformed into gears powering a fantastical flying machine. "I believe I owe you an apology for my initial reservations about your involvement with the Liberty Center." Near the end of the evening, a young man in his 20s approached Allison, moving carefully on forearm crutches. "These are incredible," he said, gesturing at the walls. "I just wanted to say thank you for making art that sees people like us as more than our limitations." Allison felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you for coming. My sister made me come," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "She's been following your work online. Said I needed to see it in person." She was right. He moved on to the next piece, and Allison felt David's hand squeeze her shoulder gently. "You did this," he said quietly. "You made something that matters." "We did this," Allison corrected. "You believed in it before I did." "I believed in you," David replied. "There's a difference, my friend." The gallery opening stretched into evening, people coming and going, some purchasing prints, others simply looking and discussing. Allison talked until her voice grew hoarse, explaining her process, listening to people share their own stories of disability and strength, and finding new ways to move through the world. Near the end of the night, when most of the crowd had dispersed, Sophie tugged on her arm. "Can I show you something?" The child led Allison to a piece near the back of the gallery, one Allison had almost not included. It showed a woman in a wheelchair sitting at a cafe table. No wings, no impossible feats, just a woman drinking coffee, looking out a window, existing in an ordinary moment. "This one's my real favorite," Sophie confided, "because she looks like you and she looks happy. Not flying happy, just regular happy." Allison studied the illustration with fresh perspective. She'd drawn it on a difficult day, when the grand metaphors felt false, when she'd wanted to capture something simpler, the quiet contentment of being enough without being extraordinary. You're right, she told Sophie. That might be my favorite too. David joined them, slipping his arm around Allison's shoulders. The gallery owner approached with news that 3 additional venues had requested to host the exhibition after its Portland run. She thinks your work could help them attract new audiences, David explained. Allison looked around the gallery at her art on these walls, at the people who'd spent their evening engaging with her vision. A year ago, she'd been sitting in a cafe convinced no one would choose her. Now she was here, chosen and choosing, building something new. Tell her yes, Allison said. Later, after the gallery had closed and they'd loaded a sleepy Sophie into the car, they drove through Portland with the windows down, spring air warm against their faces. Sophie chattered drowsily from the back seat about her favorite pieces and which ones she wanted prints of for her room. All of them, she decided finally, drifting towards sleep. I want all of them. We'll see, David responded with paternal diplomacy, exchanging an amused glance with Allison. They dropped Sophie at her grandmother's house for a sleepover, Victoria greeting them with genuine warmth that still surprised Allison. Driving home through the quiet city, David reached for her hand at a stoplight. I'm proud of you, he said simply. For tonight, for all of it. Thank you for not giving up on me, Allison replied. When I ran, when I was scared. You weren't running from me, David said with quiet insight. You were running from the story you thought we were supposed to be, the one where I rescue you and you're grateful. I never wanted that story. What story did you want? Allison asked, though she already knew the answer. David's smile held everything they'd built together over these months. The one where 2 people meet on a bad day and decide to make better days together. The one where a little girl asks her dad why a lady is sad, and somehow that question changes everything. This story, the real one. Allison squeezed his hand, contentment washing through her. I like this story too. 1 year later, Allison stood in the sunroom of what was now undeniably their home, making final adjustments to a series of illustrations for her next children's book. The Choosing Flight exhibition had toured nationally, establishing her as an important voice in both disability advocacy and children's literature. The Liberty Center's art therapy program had expanded under her direction, with satellite programs developing in rehabilitation centers across the country. Sophie burst into the room, now 7 and even more opinionated about art. Allison, Daddy says we need to leave in 10 minutes if we're going to make it to the cafe on time. The anniversary dinner's at 6. Allison smiled at the child's perpetual enthusiasm. We'll be right on time, Sophie. I just need to finish this last detail. Sophie peered over her shoulder at the illustration, a family scene featuring a father, mother in a wheelchair, and daughter gathered around a kitchen table laden with pancakes. Is that us? Sophie asked, recognizing the not-so-subtle resemblance to their weekend breakfast tradition. Allison nodded, adding final touches to the daughter figure's wild curls. It's for the new book, about families that look different but love the same. Sophie studied the image critically, her head tilted in concentration. It needs something more. Maybe a dog? We don't have a dog, Allison pointed out reasonably. Not yet, Sophie replied with the confidence of someone who considered it merely a matter of time. But we will. Daddy already said maybe for my birthday. David appeared in the doorway, keys in hand, watching their exchange with visible contentment. The cafe is holding our table, the same one from that first day. If we leave now, we'll be perfectly on time. Allison completed the final stroke on her illustration and set down her pencil. Perfect timing then. Just let me grab my purse. They drove to the cafe where everything had begun, Sophie chattering from the back seat about school projects and birthday wishes. The same corner table waited, this time deliberately reserved rather than chosen out of necessity. David ordered hot chocolate for Sophie and coffee for the adults, a recreation of their first real conversation a year earlier. When the drinks arrived, David reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Allison's breath caught as he opened it, revealing not a traditional engagement ring, but a delicate silver pendant in the shape of wings. I thought about a ring, he explained, but this seemed more fitting for us. Our story began with wings, drawn by a perceptive 6-year-old who saw possibilities the rest of us missed. The pendant represents a promise, not that I'll give you wings, but that I'll always believe in your ability to fly, exactly as you are. Allison touched the pendant with trembling fingers, recognizing the design from Sophie's original crayon drawing, now transformed into fine silver. It's perfect, she whispered, emotions threatening to overwhelm her, carefully maintained composure. Sophie watched the exchange with solemn approval. Does this mean you're going to get married? Because Tommy's dad got married again, and Tommy got to be the ring bearer, which means he carried the rings on a special pillow, and I think I would be really good at that job. David laughed, the sound rich with happiness. We haven't quite figured out those details yet, Soph. But yes, if Allison says yes, we're talking about getting married. He looked to Allison, the question clear in his eyes despite having never been formally asked. She smiled, certainty filling her completely. Yes, she said simply. The three of us, we make sense together. Sophie clapped her hands in delight while David fastened the wing pendant around Allison's neck, his fingers brushing her skin in a promise of intimacy to come later. They lingered in the cafe long after finishing their drinks, Sophie drawing on napkins while the adults talked about future plans, practical matters like combining households officially, dreams like traveling together, everyday concerns like school schedules and work balance. Ordinary conversation about an extraordinary journey that had begun in this very spot 1 year earlier. As evening light faded outside the windows, Allison glanced around the cafe, at Sophie absorbed in her drawing, at David watching them both with undisguised love, at the other patrons living their own stories unknown to her. Her gaze returned to the wing pendant resting against her collarbone, a tangible symbol of possibility discovered through connection. They had built something neither could have imagined that first day, not a story of rescue or inspiration, but of two people who had chosen each other, again and again, in all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that made a life. Sophie had been right from the beginning. Sometimes the best stories were the ones that ended like theirs, with happiness that didn't need to be explained or justified or earned through suffering. Just happiness found in the least expected places, with the people who saw you clearly enough to stay.